It was just after midnight, when the flashing red and blue lights sliced through the darkness, painting the marble columns of the sprawling estate in urgent color. The mansion, perched on a secluded hill outside Los Angeles, was the kind of place most people only saw in glossy magazines, a palace of glass and gold, guarded by iron gates and secrets. But tonight, its silence was shattered by the arrival of law enforcement, summoned by a frantic, breathless call that would soon make headlines around the world. As the officers stepped out of their cruisers, the air was thick with the scent of jasmine and something else, something metallic, sharp, and unmistakable. The front doors, usually guarded by uniformed staff, stood ajar. Inside, the grand foyer was eerily quiet, the only sound the echo of hurried footsteps on polished marble. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, casting fractured light on the chaos unfolding below. At the heart of the mansion, in a lavish bedroom draped in silk and gold, two bodies lay motionless. One was a man, his features unmistakable, even in death, the Dubai prince, known for his charm, his fortune, and his taste for the extraordinary. Beside him, a woman, elegant, beautiful, and just as still. The scene was almost too perfect, as if frozen in time. But the horror was real. Detectives moved quickly, their eyes scanning for clues. On the bedside table, a half-finished glass of champagne. Scattered across the floor, torn photographs, and a single blood-stained letter. But it was what they found hidden in the shadows, a small, unassuming object tucked beneath the bed that would send shockwaves through the investigation. It was evidence so unexpected, so chilling, that even the most seasoned officers paused. What had really happened in this palace of dreams? And who, or what, had brought such tragedy to its gilded halls? As dawn crept over the horizon, one thing was clear. Nothing in this mansion was as it seemed, and the truth, when it finally emerged, would leave everyone reeling to the world. Prince Khalid Al-Mansoor was the embodiment of modern royalty, a man whose very name conjured images of opulence, power, and intrigue. Born into one of Dubai's most influential families, Khaled's childhood was a whirlwind of privilege and expectation. His father, a respected sheikh, had built a business empire that stretched from the glittering towers of the UAE to the financial capitals of Europe and America. From a young age, Khalid was groomed to inherit not just wealth, but a legacy. He was educated at the world's finest schools, fluent in 4 languages by the time he was 16, and as comfortable in the boardrooms of London as he was on the polo fields of Abu Dhabi. Photographs of Khalid often appeared in society pages, a tall, striking man with dark, expressive eyes and a smile that seemed to promise adventure. He was known for his generosity, his love of fast cars and rare art, and his effortless charm. Women were drawn to him, and men envied his confidence. Yet, beneath the surface, there was a complexity that few ever saw. Khalid's life was a study in contrasts. He moved through a world of private jets and exclusive parties. But he was also deeply private, almost shy in intimate settings. Friends described him as thoughtful, even sensitive, a man who remembered birthdays, who sent handwritten notes, who listened more than he spoke. He was fiercely loyal to his family, but the weight of expectation often left him feeling isolated. In a world where everyone wanted something from him, genuine connection was rare. Despite his wealth, Khalid was not immune to loneliness. His relationships, though passionate, were often fleeting. He longed for something real, someone who saw him not as a prince, but as a man. This vulnerability, hidden behind a facade of confidence, made him both magnetic and, ultimately, a target. He was generous to a fault, sometimes trusting to isolate, eager to believe in the goodness of others. It was this hope, this yearning for authenticity, that would open the door to danger. Khalid's international lifestyle only added to his mystique. He was a fixture at charity galas in Paris, art auctions in New York, and Formula One races in Monaco. His Instagram feed was a curated gallery of sunsets in Santorini, private dinners in Rome, and candid moments with celebrities. Yet, for all the glamour, there were hints of restlessness, a sense that he was searching for something more than the next adventure. Those closest to him worried about his tendency to trust strangers, especially in foreign cities where his name carried both privilege and risk. He was generous with his time and money, often helping acquaintances with business ventures or personal crises. But in the shadows of his glittering world, there were always those who saw opportunity in his kindness. It was this combination of wealth, charm, and vulnerability that made Khaled irresistible and dangerously exposed. He was a man who had everything, yet wanted what money could never buy: love, trust, and belonging. And in the months leading up to his death, it was this very longing that would draw him into the orbit of a woman whose secrets would prove deadly. As the investigation into his death began, those who knew Khaled best would ask themselves the same haunting question: how could a man so powerful, so worldly, fall victim to such a devastating betrayal? The answer, as it would soon become clear, lay not in his fortune, but in his heart. Her name, at least the one she gave, was Isabella Moretti. To those who met her, Isabella was the kind of woman who left an impression long after she'd slipped from the room, a rare beauty with a quiet, magnetic presence. She moved with the grace of someone accustomed to attention. Yet there was a softness to her voice, a vulnerability in her eyes, that made people want to protect her. Or so it seemed. Isabella's story was as captivating as her appearance. Born in Florence, she claimed to have grown up surrounded by art and music. The daughter of a struggling painter and a scholar, she spoke of childhood summers spent wandering the cobblestone streets, of dreams that stretched far beyond the city's ancient walls. Her accent, lilting and melodic, only added to her allure. She told stories of working as a translator, of studying literature in Paris, of a life shaped by both hardship and hope. But for all her openness, there were gaps in her narrative details that shifted with each telling, memories that seemed just out of reach. She was quick to laugh, but slow to share anything truly personal. Friends noticed that she rarely spoke of family, that her past was a patchwork of half-truths and artful omissions. Yet, in a world where everyone wore masks, Isabella's mystery only made her more intriguing. It was at a charity gala in Monaco that she first crossed paths with Prince Khalid. The event was a swirl of champagne and whispered conversations, a gathering of the world's elite. Khalid, ever the gracious host, noticed Isabella standing alone near a marble fountain, her eyes fixed on the stars above. He introduced himself, expecting the usual flurry of excitement or nervousness. Instead, Isabella met his gaze with calm curiosity, as if she saw past the title and the wealth to the man beneath. Their conversation was effortless, a dance of wit and shared confidences. Isabella spoke of art and poetry, of longing and loss. Khaled found himself drawn in, captivated by her intelligence and warmth. She seemed untouched by the cynicism of his world, genuinely interested in his thoughts and dreams. For the first time in months, he felt seen as the night wore on. They drifted away from the crowd, finding solace in each other's company. Isabella listened as Khalid spoke of his loneliness, his desire for something real. She offered comfort, not with grand gestures, but with quiet understanding. By the end of the evening, Khalid was smitten. He asked for her number, and she hesitated just long enough to make him wonder if he'd ever see her again. In the days that followed, their connection deepened. Texts turned into phone calls, and phone calls into late-night confessions. Isabella was attentive, always knowing just what to say. She seemed to anticipate Khalid's needs, offering support and encouragement when he needed it most. Yet, beneath her kindness, there were moments fleeting, almost imperceptible, when her eyes grew distant. Her smile, a shade too practiced. Friends of Khaled, protective and wary, sensed something was off. They questioned her background, her sudden appearance in his life. But Khaled, blinded by hope and longing, dismissed their concerns. Isabella was different, he insisted. She understood him in ways no one else ever had. What no one realized was that Isabella's innocence was her greatest weapon. She knew how to listen, how to mirror Khaled's dreams and fears, how to become exactly what he needed. And while her motives remained hidden, one thing was certain. She was not in his life by accident. The spark between them was real, but so was the danger lurking just beneath the surface, a danger that would soon ignite a chain of events no one could have foreseen. From the moment their paths crossed, Khaled and Isabella's romance unfolded with the intensity of a summer storm, sudden, electric, and impossible to ignore. For Khaled, every encounter with Isabella felt like a revelation. He found himself thinking about her at odd hours, replaying their conversations, searching for hidden meanings in her words. She became the first person he messaged in the morning, and the last voice he heard before sleep. In her, he saw the promise of something he'd always craved, a love untainted by status or expectation. Their dates were the stuff of fairy tales. Khaled spared no expense, whisking Isabella away on private jets to Paris for dinner beneath the Eiffel Tower, or to Venice for a moonlit gondola ride. He delighted in surprising her, an emerald necklace left on her pillow, a bouquet of rare orchids delivered to her hotel suite, handwritten notes tucked into her purse. Isabella accepted each gesture with wide-eyed wonder, her gratitude always sincere, never greedy. "You don't have to do all this," she would whisper, her hand resting gently on his. "I'd be happy with just you." But Khaled wanted to give her the world. He saw in Isabella a kindred spirit, someone who understood the loneliness that came with privilege. He confided in her about his family's expectations, his fear of being used, his longing for a partner who saw him as more than a prince. Isabella listened, her eyes shining with empathy. "You're not alone anymore," she promised. "I see you, Khaled. The real you." As the weeks passed, their connection deepened. They shared secrets over candlelit dinners, laughed until dawn in five-star suites, and made plans for a future that seemed both thrilling and inevitable. Khaled began to imagine a life with Isabella by his side, a life where he could finally let down his guard. He introduced her to his inner circle, eager for their approval. Some friends were charmed by Isabella's warmth and intelligence, but others remained skeptical, unsettled by her reluctance to share details about her past. Still, Khaled's trust in her only grew. He found himself opening up in ways he never had before, revealing his insecurities and dreams. "I want to build something real with you," he confessed one night as they watched the city lights from his penthouse balcony. Isabella smiled, her fingers tracing circles on his hand. "I want that too. I've never felt this way before." Yet, even in the glow of new love, there were moments that gave Khaled pause. Sometimes, Isabella would disappear for hours without explanation, her phone switched off. When he asked, she would offer vague answers, an urgent call from a friend, a family emergency back in Italy. She never seemed comfortable discussing her past, quickly changing the subject whenever he pressed for details. "Let's not talk about sad things," she'd say, her voice trembling just enough to make him feel guilty for asking. There were other signs, too small, almost imperceptible. A credit card charge Khaled didn't recognize, a phone call in the middle of the night that left Isabella shaken. Once, he caught her rifling through his desk drawer, searching for something she claimed to have misplaced. Each time, she soothed his concerns with a gentle touch, a tearful apology, or a passionate embrace. "I would never hurt you," she insisted. "You're the only person who's ever truly cared for me." Khaled wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. The hope she offered was intoxicating, blinding him to the warning signs that flickered at the edges of their romance. He told himself that love required trust, that everyone deserved a second chance. And so, he ignored the doubts. choosing instead to focus on the future they were building together. But beneath the surface, the balance of power was shifting. Isabella's influence over Khalid grew stronger with each passing day, her presence both a comfort and a mystery. He was falling, fast and hard, unable to see the danger that was slowly closing in. And as their love story played out against a backdrop of luxury and longing, the seeds of betrayal were quietly taking root, waiting for the perfect moment to bloom. It was a crisp morning in early spring when Khaled made the decision that would change everything. He and Isabella were sharing breakfast on the terrace of his suite in Rome. Sunlight glinting off the silverware, the city's ancient skyline stretching out before them. Khaled watched Isabella as she sipped her coffee, her hair catching the light, and felt a surge of certainty. He wanted her in his life, not just as a fleeting romance, but as a partner, someone to share his world with. The loneliness that had haunted him for years seemed to fade in her presence, replaced by a hope he hadn't dared to feel in a long time. "Come with me to America," he said suddenly. His voice soft but resolute. Isabella looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. "To America?" she echoed, as if testing the word on her tongue. Khaled nodded, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I have a house in California. It's beautiful, private, safe. We could start fresh, just the two of us. No more hiding, no more distance." For a moment, Isabella hesitated. She glanced away, her expression unreadable. Khaled's heart pounded as he waited for her answer, 1,000 possibilities racing through his mind. Would she say yes? Would she leave everything behind for him? The silence stretched, heavy with anticipation. Then, slowly, Isabella smiled. "I would love that," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Relief washed over Khaled, mingled with excitement. He pictured them together in his sprawling mansion, far from the prying eyes of the world. He imagined lazy mornings by the pool, quiet evenings by the fire. A life where they could finally be themselves. The days that followed were a blur of preparations. Khalid arranged for Isabella's visa, hired a private jet, and instructed his staff to ready the California estate for their arrival. He spared no expense, determined to make her feel welcome and cherished. Isabella seemed both thrilled and nervous, her laughter tinged with a hint of anxiety. She spoke of her dreams for the future, of building a home together, of leaving the past behind. Yet, beneath the excitement, there were moments of unease. Khaled's friends voiced their concerns, warning him to slow down, to be careful. "You barely know her," one confidant cautioned. "Are you sure this is what you want?" But Khaled brushed aside their doubts, convinced that love was worth the risk. He was certain that Isabella was different, that their connection was real, as the jet soared over the Atlantic. Khalid gazed out the window, his thoughts a mix of hope and apprehension. He wondered if he was making the right choice, if the life he envisioned was truly within reach. Isabella sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her eyes fixed on the clouds below. She smiled when he looked at her, but there was a shadow in her gaze, a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. What Khalid didn't know was that paradise can hold its own dangers. That sometimes, the greatest risks are the ones we take for love. As the California coastline came into view, he felt a surge of anticipation. Unaware that the dream he was chasing was about to become a nightmare, and as the wheels touched down on American soil, the story of Khalid and Isabella was about to enter its most dangerous chapter. Yet the drive from the private airstrip to Khalid's California mansion was a journey through another world. As the car wound its way up the sun-drenched hills, Isabella gazed out at the landscape rolling vineyards, ancient oaks, and, finally, the gleaming gates of the estate itself. The mansion rose before them, a vision of modern luxury, white stone, soaring glass walls, and manicured gardens that seemed to stretch forever. For a moment, Isabella was silent, her eyes wide with awe. Khalid squeezed her hand, pride and anticipation swelling in his chest. "Welcome home," he said softly. Inside the house was a sanctuary of comfort and extravagance. Every detail had been chosen with care. Silk drapes, Persian rugs, priceless art on every wall. The staff greeted them with warm smiles, and Isabella was shown to a suite overlooking the infinity pool and the distant city lights. Khaled watched her explore, delighting in her wonder as she ran her fingers over the marble countertops and gazed at the view from the balcony. "It's like a dream," she whispered, and for a while, it truly felt that way. The first days were filled with laughter and discovery. Khaled took Isabella on tours of the grounds, showing her the rose garden, the stables, the private cinema. They dined under the stars, shared long walks at sunset, and spent lazy mornings wrapped in each other's arms. For Khalid, it was everything he'd hoped for, a chance to build a life together. Far from the pressures of his royal heritage. But as the days passed, small cracks began to appear in the perfect facade. It started with the phone calls, strange, persistent, always at odd hours. Isabella would excuse herself, her voice hushed and urgent behind closed doors. When Khalid asked who was calling, she brushed it off. "Just a friend from home," she'd say, forcing a smile. Nothing important. Yet the calls continued, and each time, Isabella seemed more anxious. Her mood shifting from light-hearted to withdrawn in a matter of moments. Khalid tried to ignore his growing unease. He told himself that everyone had secrets, that Isabella was simply adjusting to a new life in a foreign country. But the tension between them grew harder to ignore. Isabella became restless, pacing the halls late at night, her eyes shadowed with worry. She snapped at the staff over small mistakes, then apologized with tears in her eyes. Khaled found her once in the library, staring blankly at a family portrait, her hands trembling. Other oddities began to surface. Khaled noticed that money was missing from his wallet, small amounts at first, then larger sums. When he confronted Isabella, she laughed it off, blaming the staff or insisting he'd simply misplaced it. "You're overthinking things," she said, pressing a kiss to his cheek. "Let's not ruin this with suspicion." But the sense of security that had once filled the mansion was slowly eroding. Khalid's friends, visiting from Dubai, sensed the change immediately. "She's not herself," one remarked quietly. "Are you sure she's happy here?" Khaled wanted to believe that everything would settle, that love would conquer whatever shadows lingered in Isabella's past. But the doubts gnawed at him, growing louder with each passing day. One evening, as a storm raged outside, Khalid found Isabella in the guest room, frantically searching through drawers. When he asked what she was looking for, she froze, her face pale. "Nothing," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I thought I lost something important." Khalid tried to comfort her, but she pulled away, her body rigid with tension. The mansion, once a haven, now felt like a gilded cage. The laughter that had filled its halls was replaced by silence and suspicion. Khaled lay awake at night, listening to the wind howl against the windows, wondering what secrets Isabella was hiding and what dangers might be lurking just beyond the gates. The dream he had so carefully constructed was beginning to unravel, and he was powerless to stop it. What he didn't know was that the nightmare was only just beginning. At first, Khaled clung to hope, desperate to believe that the tension in the mansion was just a phase, a rough patch that all couples endured. He told himself that Isabella was simply homesick, that the move to America had been overwhelming, that love would heal whatever wounds had begun to fester. But as the days slipped by, the cracks in their relationship widened, and the truth became harder to ignore. Isabella's behavior grew more erratic. She withdrew from Khalid, spending hours locked away in her suite. Her phone always within reach, her conversations growing more secretive. When Khaled tried to talk to her, she would alternate between icy silence and sudden, tearful outbursts. "You don't trust me," she accused one night, her voice trembling with anger. "You promised me a new life, but all I feel is alone." Khalid, stung by her words, apologized again and again, desperate to make things right. He bought her gifts, planned romantic dinners, tried to recreate the magic of their early days. But nothing seemed to reach her. The staff, once friendly and open, became distant. Khalid noticed that Isabella had begun to give them orders behind his back, dismissing long-time employees for minor mistakes and replacing them with strangers. The house, once filled with familiar faces, now felt foreign and cold. Khalid's friends stopped visiting, their invitations politely declined or ignored. When he called his family in Dubai, Isabella would hover nearby, listening in, her expression unreadable. "They don't understand us," she would whisper afterward. "They never have." Slowly, Khalid's world shrank. He found himself isolated, cut off from the people who cared about him most. Isabella became his only confidant, the sole source of comfort in a life that was growing lonelier by the day. She played the role of devoted partner in public, but behind closed doors. Her affection was conditional, doled out only when Khalid met her demands. "If you really loved me, you'd trust me," she insisted. "You'd do this for us." It started with small requests, transfers of money to help a friend in need, access to his credit cards for emergencies, signatures on documents she claimed were for her visa. Khalid, eager to prove his devotion, complied without question. But the requests grew bolder, the sums larger, the explanations thinner. When he hesitated, Isabella would dissolve into tears, accusing him of betrayal. "You're just like everyone else," she sobbed. "You only care about yourself." Khalid's hope began to erode, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. He started to question the stories Isabella had told him, the family in Italy, the job as a translator, the tragedies that had shaped her life. When he pressed for details, she became evasive, her answers shifting from day to day. "Why are you interrogating me?" she snapped. "Don't you trust me at all?" The mansion itself seemed to turn against him. He discovered that his emails had been accessed without his knowledge, that private documents were missing from his study. His bank called to alert him to unusual activity on his accounts, but when he confronted Isabella, she flew into a rage, accusing him of spying on her. "You're suffocating me," she screamed, slamming the door in his face. Khalid's health began to suffer. He lost weight, struggled to sleep, and found himself plagued by anxiety. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and royal courts now felt powerless in his own home. He tried to reach out to friends, but Isabella intercepted his messages, insisting that they were only trying to poison him against her. "They're jealous," she whispered. "They want to see us fail." The isolation was complete. Khalid, once surrounded by admirers and allies, now wandered the halls of his mansion alone, haunted by memories of laughter and love. He replayed the early days with Isabella, searching for the moment when everything had changed. Had he missed the signs? Had he been so blinded by hope that he'd ignored the danger lurking beneath the surface? One night, as a storm battered the windows, Khaled sat in the dark, his heart pounding with fear. He realized, with a clarity that chilled him to the bone, that he no longer recognized the woman he had invited into his life. The Isabella he loved was gone, replaced by a stranger whose motives he could no longer trust. And as the shadows deepened around him, Khalid understood that he was trapped, caught in a web of lies and deceit, with no one left to turn to. But even then, a part of him clung to hope, desperate for a way out. He told himself that love could still save them, that if he just tried hard enough, he could bring Isabella back. What he didn't know was that the game had already been lost, and that the true danger was closer than he could ever imagine. The night that would end in tragedy began with a sense of foreboding that Khalid couldn't shake. The sky was heavy with clouds, the air thick and restless, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Khaled wandered the halls of his mansion, the silence pressing in on him, every shadow seeming to flicker with secrets. Isabella had been distant all day, her mood shifting from anxious to irritable, her phone never far from her hand. She barely touched her dinner, pushing her food around her plate, her eyes darting to the windows, as if expecting someone or something. As the evening wore on, Khalid retreated to his study, hoping to find solace in work. But concentration eluded him. He kept replaying the arguments they'd had over the past week about money, about trust, about the future. Each conversation seemed to end in the same place: Isabella accusing him of betrayal, Khalid begging her to believe in their love. Tonight, the tension was unbearable. He could hear her voice echoing down the hallway, sharp and urgent, as she spoke, in rapid Italian, to someone on the phone. When he entered the room, she snapped the call short, her face pale and drawn. "Who was that?" Khalid asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Isabella glared at him, her eyes cold. "No one you know. Just a friend from home." Her words were clipped, final. Khalid wanted to press further, but something in her expression warned him not to. Instead, he retreated, the sense of unease growing heavier with every passing minute. Later that night, as rain began to lash against the windows, Khalid heard the sound of a car pulling up the long driveway. He peered through the curtains, heart pounding, and saw a dark sedan idling near the gate. Isabella appeared at his side, startling him. "It's just a delivery," she said quickly, but her hands trembled as she spoke. Khalid watched as she hurried outside, disappearing into the night. He waited, nerves frayed, until she returned, clutching a small package to her chest. She refused to say what it was, brushing off his questions with a brittle laugh. The hours dragged on. Khalid tried to sleep, but every creak of the house set his nerves on edge. Sometime after midnight, he heard raised voices coming from the guest suite. He crept down the hallway, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet, and paused outside the door. Isabella was arguing with someone on the phone, her words urgent and panicked. "He's getting suspicious," she hissed. "I can't keep this up much longer." Khalid's blood ran cold. He pressed his ear to the door, straining to hear more. But the conversation ended abruptly. He stumbled back to his room, his mind racing. Was Isabella planning something? Was he in danger? He tried to call his security chief, but his phone was dead, no signal, no explanation. Panic clawed at his chest. He realized, too late, how isolated he had become. Suddenly, Isabella appeared in the doorway, her face shadowed by the dim light. "Why are you spying on me?" she demanded, her voice trembling with fury. Khalid tried to explain, but she cut him off, her words sharp as knives. The argument escalated, voices rising, accusations flying. "You never trusted me," Isabella screamed. "You ruined everything." In the chaos, Khalid barely noticed the figure slipping through the back entrance, a man, face obscured by a hood, moving silently through the darkness. By the time Khalid realized they were not alone, it was too late. The confrontation was swift, violent, and final. A struggle, a flash of steel, a cry that echoed through the empty halls. When the storm finally broke, the mansion was silent once more. Khaled lay motionless, his dreams and hopes extinguished in an instant. Isabella, her face streaked with tears, stared at the chaos she had unleashed. Outside, the rain washed away the last traces of innocence, leaving only questions and a secret that would shock everyone who dared to look for the truth. When the first officers arrived at the mansion, the scene was already thick with confusion and dread. The grandeur of the estate stood in stark contrast to the chaos inside. Shattered glass, overturned furniture, and the unmistakable signs of a struggle. But it was what the detectives found in the hours that followed that would turn a tragic death into an international scandal. Detective Laura Martinez, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for seeing what others missed, was among the first to enter the master suite. She moved methodically, her eyes scanning every detail. The bodies of Khaled and Isabella told a story of violence and desperation. But Laura sensed there was more beneath the surface. She noticed the small, blinking light beneath the bed, a hidden camera, expertly concealed. Her pulse quickened. She called for the tech team, who soon uncovered a network of surveillance devices scattered throughout the mansion. In the study, the guest rooms, even the private garden. Someone had been watching, recording, collecting secrets. As the investigation deepened, the discoveries grew more disturbing. In Isabella's suite, detectives found a locked briefcase tucked behind a false panel in the closet. Inside were forged passports, stacks of cash in multiple currencies, and a collection of SIM cards. There were also documents, contracts, letters, and bank statements bearing Khaled's signature, but with details he would never have agreed to. The handwriting was a near-perfect imitation. But a forensic expert quickly confirmed the truth. Isabella had been forging Khaled's approval for months, siphoning money into offshore accounts. The most chilling evidence, however, was found on Isabella's laptop. The hard drive contained hundreds of files, photos, videos, and detailed notes on Khaled's habits, passwords, and contacts. But it didn't stop there. There were folders labeled with other men's names, each one a dossier of personal information, financial records, and intimate correspondence. It became clear that Isabella, whose real name was not Isabella Moretti, but Sophia Ricci, was no innocent lover. She was a professional con artist, part of a sophisticated network that targeted wealthy, vulnerable men across Europe and the Middle East. Detectives traced Sophia's movements over the past decade, uncovering a trail of broken hearts and emptied bank accounts. In Paris, a widowed businessman had lost his fortune after falling for her charms. In Geneva, a diplomat's career had been ruined by a scandal she orchestrated. Each time, Sophia had vanished without a trace, reinventing herself with a new name, a new story, and a new target. Khaled, with his longing for love and his trusting nature, had been her latest and, as it turned out, her last victim. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. The media seized on the story, painting Sophia as a femme fatale, a master manipulator who had seduced and destroyed one of Dubai's most beloved princes. But for Detective Martinez, the case was more than a headline. She saw the human cost, the loneliness that had made Khaled vulnerable, the cunning that had allowed Sophia to infiltrate his life, and the devastation left in her wake. As the evidence mounted, the truth became impossible to ignore. The love story that had captivated so many was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. A web of lies, spun by a woman who knew exactly how to exploit hope and trust. The hidden cameras, the forged documents, the trail of victims all pointed to a single, chilling conclusion. Khaled's death was not a tragic accident, but the final act in a long and calculated con. And as the world watched in disbelief, the question remained: how many others had fallen prey to Sophia's deception? And how many more would have, if not for the shocking discovery that finally brought her reign of manipulation to an end? In the days following the discovery at the mansion, the investigation shifted into overdrive. Detective Martinez and her team worked around the clock, determined to untangle the web Sophia Ricci had spun across continents. The evidence was overwhelming, but the scope of the scam was even greater than anyone had imagined. The first step was to follow the money. Forensic accountants pored over Khaled's bank records, tracing a series of wire transfers that led from his personal accounts to a maze of offshore companies. Each transaction was carefully disguised, routed through shell corporations in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Singapore. The sums were staggering, millions siphoned away in increments, each one authorized with Khaled's forged signature. The team discovered that Sophia had used similar tactics with her previous victims, leaving a trail of financial devastation in her wake. Detectives reached out to Interpol and law enforcement agencies in Europe and the Middle East. Soon, a pattern emerged. Sophia had operated under at least 6 different aliases, each time targeting wealthy, emotionally vulnerable men. She would appear in their lives as if by fate, weaving stories of hardship and hope, gaining their trust before slowly isolating them from friends and family. Once she had control, the financial exploitation would begin, always subtle at first, then escalating as her victims became more dependent on her affection and approval. Witness interviews painted a picture of a woman who was both brilliant and ruthless. Former staff at the mansion described how Sophia had manipulated them, sowing distrust and fear to ensure their silence. Khaled's friends recalled their growing unease, their attempts to warn him, and their heartbreak at being pushed away. One close confidant, his voice trembling, told detectives he just wanted to be loved. He thought she was his chance at happiness. The emotional toll on Khaled's family was profound. His mother, devastated by the loss of her son, struggled to understand how someone so beloved could be so thoroughly deceived. His siblings, angry and grief-stricken, demanded justice, not just for Khaled, but for every victim Sophia had left behind. The family's grief was compounded by the public nature of the scandal. Their private pain splashed across headlines around the world as the investigation continued. Detectives pieced together the timeline of Sophia's deception. They uncovered emails, text messages, and surveillance footage that documented her every move. Each new revelation brought fresh waves of shock and sorrow, but also a sense of resolve. The team was determined to bring Sophia to justice, to ensure that Khaled's story would serve as a warning to others. By the time the case was ready for prosecution, the full extent of Sophia's crimes had come to light. She had left a trail of broken lives and empty bank accounts from Paris to Dubai, her charm and cunning unmatched. But in the end, it was her own arrogance, her belief that she could outsmart anyone, that led to her downfall. For Khaled's family, the investigation offered some measure of closure, but the wounds would take years to heal. The world would remember the prince for his generosity and hope, but those who loved him would never forget the lesson his tragedy had taught, that even the brightest dreams can be shattered by the darkness of deceit. Sophia Richie's arrest was as dramatic as the life she had led. After weeks on the run, she was finally tracked to a luxury hotel in Miami, living under yet another false identity. The FBI, working with Interpol, moved in swiftly, catching her off guard as she sipped espresso by the pool. For the first time, the woman who had always been one step ahead found herself cornered, her carefully constructed world collapsing in an instant. In the interrogation room, Sophia's composure began to crack. At first, she denied everything, insisting she was a victim of mistaken identity. Her eyes darted nervously as detectives laid out the evidence. The forged documents, the hidden cameras, the trail of stolen money. Each new piece chipped away at her defenses. When confronted with the files from her laptop dossiers on Khaled and her other victims, her mask of innocence slipped. She fell silent, her hands trembling in her lap. Detective Martinez pressed on, her questions relentless, but calm. "Why Khalid?" she asked. "Why any of them?" Sophia stared at the table, refusing to meet her gaze. "They were lonely," she finally whispered. "They wanted to believe in something. I just gave them what they wanted." The admission hung in the air, heavy with the weight of all she had done. As the days passed, Sophia's lies unraveled one by one. She confessed to forging Khaled's signature, to orchestrating the financial transfers, to manipulating him until he was completely isolated. She admitted to using multiple identities, to targeting men who were vulnerable and wealthy, to building her life on a foundation of deceit. The full scope of her crimes stunned even the most experienced investigators. The legal consequences were swift and severe. Sophia was charged with fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and involuntary manslaughter. The evidence was overwhelming, and her attempts to bargain for leniency fell flat. In court, she faced not only the law, but the families of her victims, their grief and anger impossible to ignore. The judge's sentence was harsh, reflecting the international scale of her crimes and the devastation she had caused. For Sophia Richie, the days of luxury and lies were over. The woman who had once moved through the world with confidence and charm now faced a future defined by bars and regret. And for those she had hurt, her downfall was a small measure of justice in a story marked by heartbreak and betrayal. In the weeks and months that followed the trial, the echoes of Khaled's death lingered in every corner of his family's life. The mansion in California, once filled with laughter and hope, stood empty, a silent monument to dreams that had turned to dust. His mother, once the heart of family gatherings, withdrew into herself, haunted by memories of her son's gentle smile and the phone calls she would never receive again. She replayed their last conversation over and over, searching for signs she might have missed, words she wished she'd spoken. Khaled's siblings struggled with their own grief, each carrying a different burden. His younger sister, who had always looked up to him, was consumed by guilt for not doing more to protect him. His older brother, usually stoic and strong, found himself overwhelmed by anger at Sophia, at the world, and at himself for not seeing through the deception. The family's grief was compounded by the relentless attention of the media. Their private pain made public, their mourning interrupted by questions and cameras. Yet, amid the sorrow, there was a sense of justice. Sophia Richie's conviction brought a measure of closure, a public acknowledgement of the wrongs she had committed. The family took comfort in knowing that her days of manipulation were over, that she would never again prey on another vulnerable soul. They established a foundation in Khaled's name, dedicated to supporting victims of romance scams and raising awareness about the dangers that had claimed his life. Still, the trauma lingered. Trust, once given freely, became harder to offer. The wounds left by betrayal and loss would take years to heal, if they ever truly did. But in their darkest moments, Khaled's loved ones clung to the memory of his kindness, his hope, and his belief in love. They vowed to honor his legacy, not by forgetting the pain, but by using it to protect others from the shadows that had stolen him. Away Khaled's story is a heartbreaking reminder that even the most powerful, intelligent, and loving people can fall victim to deception. Love scams are not just stories in the news, they are real, and they can happen to anyone. As we reflect on the tragedy that unfolded in that California mansion, it's crucial to recognize the warning signs and arm ourselves with knowledge. Could this happen to you, or someone you love? The answer is yes, unless you know what to look for. Scammers like Sophia Richie are masters of psychology. They prey on loneliness, hope, and the universal desire for connection. They move quickly, creating an intense emotional bond in a short period of time. If someone you've just met showers you with affection, makes grand promises, or pushes for a rapid commitment, take a step back. Real relationships take time to build. If it feels too good to be true, it often is. Another red flag is secrecy. Scammers often avoid sharing details about their past, or their stories change when pressed for specifics. They may claim to have a tragic background or ongoing family emergencies that tug at your heartstrings. If you notice inconsistencies, don't ignore them. Ask questions, and trust your instincts if something feels off. Isolation is a powerful tactic. Sophia slowly cut Khaled off from his friends and family, making herself his only confidant. If someone in your life discourages you from seeing loved ones, or tries to control your social circle, consider it a warning sign. Healthy relationships encourage connection, not isolation. Financial requests are perhaps the most obvious sign. Scammers will invent emergencies, business opportunities, or legal troubles that require your help. They may ask for money, access to your accounts, or signatures on documents. Never send money or share sensitive information with someone you haven't known for long. No matter how convincing their story may be, if you suspect you or someone you know is being targeted, don't be afraid to seek help. Talk to trusted friends, consult with professionals, and report suspicious behavior to authorities. There is no shame in being deceived. Scammers are skilled manipulators, and their tactics are designed to bypass even the strongest defenses. Khaled's legacy is a call to vigilance and compassion. By sharing his story, we can protect ourselves and others from falling into the same traps. Remember, love should never come with fear, secrecy, or demands for money. Stay alert, trust your instincts, and never be afraid to walk away from a relationship that doesn't feel right. The next victim could be anyone. Don't let it be you.